don't buy commercial muffins. Not only are they huge and laden with fat and sugar, they usually are not that special to be worth the calories, and I'd rather not consume more than half my day's calories with my 10 o'clock coffee. However, a local coffee shop had a muffin they called a cappuccino chip muffin that looked beautiful. It had a sparkly, crunchy top, and it just looked very inviting. So I treated myself, and I immediately fell in love with the flavor profile. And in our little home test kitchen, we decided to try to recreate this recipe. The first attempt was due to my remembering it as a mocha chip muffin, and I put cocoa in the batter. It was a nice muffin, but when we went back to check it against the original, it was like, oh my goodness, this is not what we wanted. So we tried again, and we removed the cocoa from the batter. We upped the cinnamon a little bit, and it looked like we were right on target. But the ultimate test was when we went back to this little coffee shop, bought another muffin, brought it home, and did a side-by-side tasting, and we liked ours better. So I am presenting you with a very quick and easy, traditionally made cappuccino chip muffin. As with most muffins, you have your dry ingredients, you have your wet ingredients, you mix them together, you put them in your greased muffin tins, and you bake. No mixer needed. The spoon that I use is a synthetic, it's not a wood spoon, it's a synthetic, which makes sure there will be no little flavors of garlic or onion in my muffins. And this is important, unless you like savory muffins and are really fond of garlic. All right, the first thing I did was I mixed my dry ingredients, and that consisted of 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour, which I measure by stirring up the flour, scooping it, leveling it off gently, and putting it into the bowl. That prevents packing down, which will give you too dense a muffin. To this, I added 2½ teaspoons of baking powder, about 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 cup of white sugar, and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. The best way to mix these is with a whisk. And the advantage of using something with color like cinnamon is that as you stir it, you watch as the dark color disperses, and when it's evenly dispersed, you know that your baking powder and salt are also evenly dispersed. Much, much better than sifting. Sifting things together does not disperse this, as was discovered by some research that was actually done challenging the traditional method that you'll still find around from people who don't know any better. So those are my dries. The next thing I did was I prepared my wets. The wet ingredients consisted of 3/4 cup of milk. I like using 1% milk. It's lower in fat, but still has a nice sweet flavor and is perfect for baking. Remember, these are not exactly health food, but they really are quite healthful compared to your regular muffin on the street. All right, to this I added, to get the cappuccino flavoring, I added 1/4 cup of cooled strong coffee. My shortcut for this is to use 1/4 cup of water, to which I add 2 level tablespoons of granulated espresso coffee. Cafe Bustelo, Medaglia d'Oro, anything that's strong works well. Let it cool down so that it doesn't cook your eggs. Because the next thing we add is 1 egg and 1/3 cup of oil. I use canola oil. Any flavorless cooking oil will do. And 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And that I beat together. I use a fork for that, and it blends it very nicely. You could use your whisk again. And those are the wets. Now, to get the chip part, this was a little tricky. The commercial muffin had lovely little chips that dispersed much better than the normal size commercial chocolate chip. Unfortunately, little mini chips of a good quality chocolate are a specialty item, and you will end up spending maybe $6 to $8 a pound, particularly if you order them mail order from a place like King Arthur Flour. I found that Costco, currently under their Kirkland brand, is carrying a regular chocolate chip of an excellent quality chocolate. Too excellent. We keep about 3 extra big bags on hand at all times in case they decide not to stock it anymore. But they're regular size. So I chopped them. First I figured I would try it in the Cuisinart but it didn't do it evenly enough. I ended up with big chunks and dust. So I just put them on my cutting board, and I do have a dedicated cutting board, a non-onion, non-garlic cutting board that I use for sweet things. I chop them up with a chef's knife to get pea-shaped particles. It was not perfect, but worked quite well. And I add the chocolate chips to the dries. The reason for doing this is that when you have things with weight, chips, berries, things like that, and you add it to your dry ingredients, the little particles get coated with flour, and they're less likely to sink to the bottom. It sounds like an old wives' tale, but I find that in general it does work. So we mix that up. Now we have a nice dry ingredient mix with the chocolate. And the next thing to do is to combine the dries and wets. And if you've made muffins before, you know the cardinal rule is do not overmix, or you get these nasty tunnels. All right, so I add this, and we stir it just until everything is combined. And this is why you don't use a mixer. It's too easy to overmix with a mixer. And there's nothing here that requires muscle, like creaming butter and sugar. For that, I always use a mixer or my Cuisinart, because it's just not worth all the hand effort. But this is nothing. This is a great thing to have kids do, too, because even little ones can stir very carefully. Make sure you don't spill anything, or you can use an oversized bowl. Always better to use a bigger bowl than you think you'll need. Just somehow works out better that way, and there's no downside. All right, you scrape, you make sure that there's no dry ingredients, and then you fill your muffin cups, which I do inelegantly, because I hate dirtying up extra spoons. I do wash my hands. I don't lick my fingers. So it's certainly as sanitary, or more sanitary actually, than you're likely to find with a commercial product. I once worked in a bakery when my younger son was small, and I had a couple of hours free, and I wanted to build up my cake decorating time. And the owner brought her dog in the back, which is against Department of Health violations, and it was really pretty disgusting. So sometimes you're better off not knowing what goes on in the back and just enjoying the product. With baked goods, at least you figure they get baked, so anything really nasty is likely to get killed. So in your home kitchen, if you take reasonable precautions, you know, you don't stir this with a spoon that you used, that you touched to raw chicken. You find things like this kind of advice. You fill this as evenly as possible. But you're not a bakery, and no one's going to complain that they're paying full price for an undersized muffin. If you have too much batter that you can't scrape up, you can use a soft rubber spatula. I don't think I'll need it here, but sometimes if it looks like I'm going to waste too much, I do that. Break my rule, and I do the extra little slight dishwashing. Now, I mentioned a nice crunchy top that these muffins, the commercial ones, have. And I found that the easiest way to do that is to sprinkle plain, ordinary granulated sugar on top. I tried it with fancier sugars, but I found it was the granulated sugar that melts and gives you a nice crust. Unless I'm doing it for a special occasion where I want them to look very fancy, I leave it off because it tastes fine, and you don't need the extra tablespoon or so. Sugar is about 50 calories a tablespoon, and you can easily use that on top of each muffin, keeping the calories low. And as you can may have noticed, it was only 1/3 of a cup oil and 1/2 cup sugar for this whole batch. I may try a version using part white whole wheat flour one day and make it even more helpful, but the profile here is so delicious. At present, I don't want to mess with a thing. I preheated my oven to 500 degrees. Now that sounds obscene. It sounds like I'm going to incinerate the muffins. But I found this advice in a very good basic King Arthur baking book, and it works beautifully with muffins. I put it in at 500, shut the door, immediately turn it down to 400, and then I'll give it about 15 minutes baking time. I start checking at about 12 minutes. It's always a good idea to start checking 5 to 10 minutes before the instructions say your product should be done. Over baking will give you a dry product. It's the easiest way to ruin something. A product that's slightly overbaked is actually preferable to one that's, slightly underbaked is preferable to one that's overbaked. So I'm going to put this in. This little one here I think we'll use for testing purposes. I'll reduce the temperature from 500 to 400, and then we'll pull it out when it's done. The timer just went off, and I'm going to check the muffins to see if they're done. I do this with a skewer or toothpick inserted to see if it comes out clean. Clean as a whistle. You turn off the oven. And there you have it. One thing that I didn't mention that I should add, as long as I have the opportunity, is that when I added the espresso, what I used was instant espresso powder, not regular ground espresso, which certainly won't dissolve. So if you've been copying down the recipe, make that little amendment, and that way you'll make sure that it comes out right. And I think you'll find if you try this, that this is really a superior muffin and practically a health food. So enjoy, and thanks for watching.